In the icy wind of Bozeman's livestock fair, a 15-year-old girl named Hazel stops dead in her tracks. In the farthest corner, barely visible in the shadows, stands a frail Mustang with eyes full of tears. No one else sees her. No one else cares. But Hazel does. In that one silent moment, she feels it deep in her bones. This horse wasn't just forgotten. She was waiting. Waiting for someone brave enough to believe that broken doesn't mean beyond saving. And Hazel? She's about to prove it. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The wind swept in sharp and dry from the north as dawn cracked over Bozeman, Montana. October's chill had settled into the bones of the town, coating the fields in a thin film of frost. The sky was an aching shade of blue, so wide it felt like it could swallow everything beneath it. The Bozeman Livestock Fairground buzzed with energy, pickup trucks rattling over gravel, flannel shirts and cowboy hats crowding the open space beneath canvas tents. The smell of hay, manure, coffee, and smoked sausages created a familiar mixture that clung to everything. This was the annual livestock auction, where horses were bought, sold, bartered, and judged. And to 15-year-old Hazel Quinn, it felt more like a circus of noise than a place of meaning. Hazel walked beside her father, Elliot Quinn, her boots crunching rhythmically against the gravel path. She wore a dusty olive-green jacket with the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, her long brown hair braided loosely down her back. Hazel was of medium height, but carried herself with a sense of quiet determination that made her seem taller. Her skin was freckled, her eyes a stormy blend of green and steel gray. Eyes that didn't just observe, but absorbed. She was soft-spoken, but not timid, kind, but not naive. And since the death of her mother 2 years prior, she had developed a kind of emotional gravity that pulled the world closer to her than she ever let on. Her father, Elliot, walked with a slow, even gait. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, Elliot had once been known for his easy charm and big laugh. But since the passing of his wife, Hazel's mother, Emily, something inside him had withdrawn. He had a clean-shaven face most days, though his jaw now carried the stubble of someone who no longer looked too hard in the mirror. His eyes, a deeper version of Hazel's, often wandered off as if stuck in the past. He loved his daughter. That much was never in doubt, but grief had dulled his words and deepened the silence between them. Hazel didn't come to the auction to buy anything. She came for time. Time with her father, even if it was filled with half-spoken words and quiet nods. She'd always loved horses, but that day, the horses weren't what called her there. It was the hope of brushing past whatever wall had built up between them. A connection that had started to fracture the moment her mother's laugh vanished from the house. They wandered past rows of horses, each more majestic than the last, well-fed, gleaming, with eager breeders and buyers standing nearby. The louder men joked about muscle and bloodlines, while the quieter ones inspected hooves and teeth, like merchants judging gemstones. Hazel smiled politely at a few chestnut colts, patted the nose of a gray stallion, but nothing stirred inside her. That was until something caught the corner of her vision. It was in the farthest corner of the tent, where the canvas roof sagged and the light barely reached. Away from the polished hooves and proud manes stood a frail little Mustang, barely taller than Hazel's shoulder. Her coat, once a brilliant mix of silver and bronze, was now mottled and dull. She had patches of missing fur, ribs showing like fence slats, and a wound near her right shoulder that looked old but unhealed. But what stopped Hazel cold wasn't the state of the mare's body, it was her eyes. The Mustang's eyes shimmered, wide and glassy, reflecting not just pain, but understanding. Real tears traced down the contours of her dusty face. They weren't dramatic or exaggerated. They were quiet, steady. Grief made flesh. Hazel stepped forward, almost without realizing it. Her hands trembled as she gripped the rail of the small pen. In that moment, it wasn't a horse she saw. It was a mirror. The eyes of the mare looked so much like the eyes of her grandmother, Martha Quinn, that Hazel almost gasped aloud. Martha, once a spirited woman with a sharp tongue and a quicker laugh, had become a ghost of herself in the years since her husband passed. She lived alone now in the same house where she'd once hosted barn dances and Sunday dinners. Hazel remembered seeing her last Christmas, sitting silently by the window, watching snow fall where lights used to hang. She hadn't spoken much that day, just sipped her tea and stared at nothing. That silent ache, the one Hazel never had the words to describe, was there now, staring back at her from the eyes of this horse. "She's crying," Hazel whispered. Elliot, who had stayed a few steps behind, furrowed his brow and joined her side. He followed her gaze and saw the trembling creature. "Dust in her eyes, sweetheart. Horses don't cry," he said quietly, though his tone lacked conviction. Hazel didn't reply. She leaned a little closer, whispering, "She's lost, like Grandma, like us." Elliot shifted his weight, discomfort spreading across his features. "Hazel? That mare's got nothing left. Skin and bones. Whoever owned her before gave up for a reason." "But maybe," Hazel said, turning toward him, "that's exactly why she needs us." Elliot sighed deeply. He looked at the mare, then at his daughter, at the stubborn lift of her chin, the fierce glint in her tired eyes. "Hazel," he said, voice soft but firm, "we're not running a sanctuary." "We don't have to," she replied. "Just a second chance. For her. For Grandma." The silence stretched. From somewhere deeper in the fairgrounds, the voice of the auctioneer echoed, calling bids, selling futures. Elliot turned back toward the mare. She hadn't moved, just watched them, blinking slow, tears still shining. In her eyes there was no panic, no fight, just a worn-out kind of waiting. Hazel didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. A minute later, Elliot raised 2 fingers. By the time Elliot and Hazel reached the outskirts of their family's ranch, the sky had darkened to the color of old bruises. Bozeman's October air had turned wet, thick, with the scent of pine and approaching rain. Their old blue truck rattled along the gravel drive, headlights cutting through the mist. In the back, the Mustang, now named Luna, stood with her legs locked tight, pressed into the corner of the trailer rigged together by Elliot earlier that morning. Her ribs trembled with each jolt, her ears twitching nervously as though listening for something she'd forgotten. Hazel sat sideways in the front seat, one leg tucked under her, eyes fixed on the open slat between the cab and the trailer. Her heart beat unevenly every time Luna shifted. She couldn't explain it, not yet, but she knew this mare had become more than a horse to her. She was a promise, a whisper of healing, a connection too fragile to name. The ranch came into view as a low sprawl across a ridge of land overlooking cottonwoods and golden fields. The main house sat square and tired in the fading light, its white wood chipped from years of Montana wind. Off to the left stood the barn, leaning but solid. Behind the house was the pasture, dry and scattered with weeds, left fallow for nearly 5 years since the last horse had grazed there. Martha Quinn stood on the front porch, wrapped in a thick gray shawl that matched the clouds overhead. She was 69 years old, lean and weathered from decades of ranch life. Her silver hair was braided in a crown around her head, and her sharp blue eyes, though softened by time, still missed nothing. She held a wooden cane in one hand, her back stiff from an old fall during a cattle drive long ago. Once the pride of Gallatin Valley horse training, Martha had withdrawn from animals and much of the world since the death of her husband, Peter. She watched the truck roll to a stop, squinting at the unfamiliar shape in the trailer. "What's that?" she called out as Elliot climbed from the cab. Hazel stepped out behind him, brushing dust from her jacket. "A second chance," she said, quieter than she intended. Martha's brow tightened. "You bought a horse?" Her voice dropped into its familiar register, disbelief tinged with warning. Elliot sighed, keeping his tone neutral. "Hazel saw something, we thought." He trailed off as Martha's gaze settled fully on the frail mare inside the trailer. Luna's head lifted slowly, nostrils flaring. Her tail swished, more reflex than intention, and her eyes locked with Martha's. There was a pause. The kind of pause that isn't empty but full of memory. Martha gripped the porch railing a little harder. "That thing's skin and bones," she muttered. "Should have been put down, not dragged home." Hazel stepped forward, her voice firmer now. "Her name's Luna, and I'll care for her myself. Every day." Martha's expression didn't change. "You planning to feed her hay with dreams?" "I'll work for her hay," Hazel said, chin high. "I'll clean stalls, mend fences. I don't need help." The rain began in a whisper, brushing the porch roof with soft percussion. From the barn, a low bark echoed. Hazel turned just in time to see a stocky old border collie emerge into the fading light. His coat was mottled black and gray, his eyes cloudy but bright with focus. He limped slightly from arthritis in his hind legs. "That's Jasper," Elliot murmured, noticing Hazel's glance. "Still kicks around the place, sleeps most of the day now." Jasper padded over to Luna's trailer, sniffing at the air, tail swishing thoughtfully. Martha descended the porch steps with slow, deliberate movements. She walked with a limp that deepened in the cold, her cane tapping softly against the wet earth. As she neared the trailer, Luna flinched. Martha paused, studying her. "Eyes like storm glass," she said softly, "just like Dahlia's." "Who's Dahlia?" Hazel asked. Martha didn't answer. She turned back toward the house. "Park her in the south paddock," she called over her shoulder. "The grass still grows there." Hazel's heart leapt, but she didn't speak. Actions were Martha's real words. The south paddock hadn't seen a horse since Peter passed away. Hazel remembered asking once why they didn't keep any horses anymore. Martha had answered with only a shrug. But now, as Luna stumbled out of the trailer, guided by a soft rope and Hazel's steady hand, she was walking ground that hadn't been touched by hooves in years. The paddock was a large, slightly sloped enclosure rimmed by weathered fencing. Weeds grew wild in places, and old horseshoes still rusted beneath patches of grass. A small lean-to stood in the corner where rain couldn't reach and wind broke at the walls. Hazel led Luna through the gate slowly, whispering, "You're home now." The mare took 2 hesitant steps, then stopped, her body still trembling. Hazel didn't pull the rope. She simply stood there with her palm open and quiet. Eventually, Luna moved again. That night, the rain came harder, drumming on the roof of the old house like restless fingers. Hazel lay awake in her room under a heavy quilt, staring at the cracked ceiling. Down the hall, Martha moved slowly through her nighttime routine, tea kettle hissing, a radio playing faint classical music, the occasional thump of a cane against the hardwood. Hazel could hear her father's voice, low and careful, in the kitchen. He was trying, she knew, trying to reach across years of silence. Outside, Luna stood beneath the lean-to, still as stone, but no longer alone. In the morning, Hazel rose early. She made oatmeal with cinnamon and packed a canvas bag with a stiff brush, a carrot, and a small paperback book. The rain had stopped, and the sky had returned to pale gold. Jasper followed her out to the paddock, wagging his tail, pausing often to sniff puddles. Hazel slipped into the enclosure slowly, sitting cross-legged near the fence, not looking directly at Luna. She began reading aloud, something light, something about a girl who spoke to birds. And after a while, the mare turned her head. Then stepped forward, one step, then another. The mornings in Bozeman were growing colder, the grass tipped with frost that crunched under Hazel's boots as she crossed the paddock. School started just after 8, but Hazel had begun waking before the sun, slipping quietly out of the house with a thermos of hot tea and her canvas bag. The ranch was still half asleep at that hour, fog curling low over the pasture, the barn doors creaking slightly in the wind, and the familiar sound of Jasper's paws padding behind her. The old border collie, now 11, had taken to joining Hazel every morning, watching her with a quiet patience as she worked around Luna's space. Luna remained cautious, always alert. The silver bronze mare with eyes like broken glass still preferred the far corner of the paddock, nose tucked low, muscles tense. She was no longer trembling constantly, but she flinched at loud noises, sudden movement, or anything unfamiliar, like the squeak of the old water pump or a fluttering tarp. Hazel never rushed. She always sat near the gate first, reading aloud from old paperbacks, choosing stories with soft voices and steady rhythms. She had learned that trust wasn't earned by effort, but by consistency. Luna didn't understand words, but she understood presence, and presence was something Hazel had to give. Hazel herself was settling into a rhythm too. After school, she would ride the bus to the end of the county road and walk the last half-mile to the ranch, stopping only to drop her backpack in the house and wave at her grandmother if she happened to be near the kitchen window. Then she'd spend the rest of the daylight hours brushing Luna with a slow, careful hand. The brush she used had once belonged to her mother. A worn wooden handle, initials EQ, carved into the side. The bristles were frayed, the leather strap faded, but Hazel swore it still held her mother's scent, lavender and cedarwood. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the ridge and painted the pasture gold, Hazel tried something new. She brought an apple from the kitchen, slicing it carefully into thin wedges. When she stepped into the paddock, Luna tensed, her hooves shifting nervously. Hazel didn't approach. She crouched near the fence line, placed a slice of apple on her palm, and waited. Minutes passed. Hazel's legs ached from crouching. A chill crept up her spine. Still, she did not move. And then, like a shadow reluctantly reaching for light, Luna took one slow step forward. Her ears flicked back, then forward again. She paused. Another step. Hazel's breath caught as Luna reached her, lowered her head, and gently nudged her nose against the apple slice. The contact was light, tentative, but real. She took the piece, then retreated quickly. Hazel didn't follow. She simply smiled, heart swelling. Inside the house, behind the slightly fogged kitchen window, Martha Quinn stood quietly holding a steaming mug. Her hands, knotted with age and arthritis, trembled slightly as she sipped her tea. She had been watching Hazel every afternoon since the mayor arrived. At first, with skepticism, then curiosity, and now, with something closer to reverence. She didn't say much to Hazel about the horse, but she had taken to boiling an extra egg at breakfast, setting it on a plate near the stove where Hazel could grab it for energy before school. Little things. The kind of gestures Martha had never been good at explaining. One evening, a visitor arrived. Hazel had just finished brushing Luna's mane and was cleaning the curry comb when she heard tires crunching gravel. A faded yellow sedan pulled up near the barn, and out stepped a woman in a dusty denim coat, her red hair tied in a tight bun. "Hazel Quinn?" the woman called out. Hazel froze. "Yes?" the woman smiled. "Name's Nora Temple. I'm with Gallatin Valley Animal Welfare. Heard from a friend at the auction about the mare you took in. Just checking to make sure she's okay." Nora Temple was in her mid-30s, tall and willowy, with sharp cheekbones and a clipboard always in hand. Her boots were clean, her jeans crisp, and her voice had the practiced warmth of someone who had said, "I'm just here to help," more times than she could count. She had worked in rescue for over a decade, hardened by years of neglected animals and red tape. But she had a soft spot for children who tried harder than adults. Hazel straightened. "She's doing better," she said carefully. "Still nervous, but she ate from my hand yesterday." Nora's eyes lit up with genuine surprise. "That's rare for a Mustang fresh out of auction. You've done good." She walked with Hazel to the paddock fence, observing Luna from a respectful distance. "Do you know her story?" Hazel asked quietly. Nora nodded. "Came from a failed breeding farm east of Billings. Owner passed away. No one claimed the horses. She bounced through 2 pens before landing at the Bozeman auction. No one bid. Not until you." Hazel looked back at Luna, who was now grazing tail flicking gently. "She's special," Hazel murmured. Nora smiled again. "You've got a touch. If you ever want to learn more training rescue, look me up. We've got a volunteer program." As quickly as she arrived, Nora left, leaving behind a pamphlet and a name scribbled in blue ink. That night, Hazel read the pamphlet by flashlight in her room, circling words like equine therapy and rehabilitation training. New ideas bloomed quietly in her chest. Later, Hazel found herself on the porch steps. Martha joined her, settling into the rocking chair with a blanket across her lap. "She let me feed her today," Hazel said after a long pause. Martha didn't reply right away. Then she said, "Dahlia never would have done that. Not for anyone but me." Hazel turned to her grandmother. "You had a Mustang too?" "She was wild. Took me 6 weeks to get a halter on her, but she stayed with me until the end." Hazel didn't push for more. She didn't have to. They sat in silence, the stars stretching overhead. Luna flicked her ears in the dark and took another step closer to the fence. The sky over Bozeman turned leaden just after midday, a strange stillness settling over the Quinn Ranch. Birds disappeared. The wind paused. Jasper, usually content to nap in the sun near the barn, paced restlessly in front of the porch, ears twitching, nose to the wind. Hazel noticed his change in behavior first and glanced up at the clouds gathering fast over the hills. They were unusually dark for October, heavy with something more than rain. She had just finished grooming Luna, who now tolerated soft strokes along her neck and back without flinching. The mare had gained weight, her coat shedding its brittle patches and beginning to gleam faintly in the light. She still avoided sudden movement and loud sounds, but she had begun walking toward Hazel instead of away. Hazel patted Luna's side gently. "Let's get you some extra hay," she whispered, then turned to retrieve the wheelbarrow. Jasper let out a low whine from the porch steps. Hazel followed his eyes. A shiver ran through her. The clouds were dropping low, churning with a strange yellow hue beneath the gray, like smoke pressing down against the land. A storm was coming, and fast. Inside the house, Martha was at the kitchen sink peeling apples, her thick gray shawl tucked over her shoulders. She watched the sky from the window and didn't need a weather report to know what was about to hit. Her bones, stiff with age and memory, had been warning her since morning. By late afternoon, the wind returned with force, howling through the cottonwoods and snapping branches near the barn. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in under an hour. Hazel rushed to the paddock, heart pounding. Luna was pacing now, her tail high, hooves leaving nervous divots in the damp soil. Elliot had gone to town for supplies. Martha shouted from the porch, "Get her to the barn." Hazel grabbed Luna's halter rope, her fingers numb from the sudden cold. A clap of thunder cracked across the sky like a rifle shot, and Luna bolted. The rope slipped through Hazel's hands as the mare charged against the wind, hurdling the shallow ditch and tearing across the pasture. "No," Hazel cried. The rain came seconds later, hard and unforgiving, like glass against skin. Hazel ran without thinking, her boots slipping through the grass, shouting Luna's name into the wind. Behind her, Martha had grabbed her cane and began descending the porch. "You'll get lost in that field," she called after Hazel. But Hazel didn't hear. All she saw was the shrinking shape of the Mustang, vanishing into the gloom. Halfway across the pasture, the ground turned to mud beneath Hazel's feet. She stumbled, caught herself, and kept running. Behind her, she heard Martha cry out. Hazel spun around. Martha was on the ground, a hand clutching her ankle, her cane flung 10 feet away. Hazel ran back, breath ragged. "Grandma!" Martha's face was contorted in pain. "Twisted," she gasped. "It's bad." Hazel looked around helplessly. They were too far from the house. No one else was near. Elliot wouldn't be back for hours. Jasper barked in the distance, pacing at the paddock gate, unable to help. "I'm sorry," Hazel whispered, tears mixing with rain. "I shouldn't have let her bolt." Then out of the dark, a shape appeared. Luna. She stepped carefully, nostrils flaring, eyes wild but focused. Her body was slick with rain, her muscles quivering, but she walked toward them, slow, deliberate. Hazel held her breath as the mare stopped just a few feet away. Martha blinked through the water streaming from her hair. "Is she?" Hazel moved slowly, reaching for Luna's halter again. This time, the horse didn't pull away. Hazel turned to her grandmother. "Can you stand if I help?" Martha clenched her jaw. "Maybe. With her." Hazel looped the rope gently around her hand and helped Martha grip Luna's damp mane. Luna stood still, hooves sinking in the mud, legs braced. Slowly with effort, Martha rose, leaning heavily against the horse. Step by step, they made their way back. By the time they reached the porch, Hazel was shaking from cold, and Martha was white-lipped with pain. Luna followed them the whole way, her head down, her body close, steady as a shadow. Jasper barked and wagged his tail wildly when they arrived, then ran circles around the group as Hazel guided her grandmother into the house. That night, after a hot bath and dry blankets, Martha sat propped on the couch, her swollen ankle wrapped in an old scarf. Hazel brought her tea and sat at her feet, still pale from the adrenaline wearing off. Martha reached for her hand. "That horse," she said, "is no ordinary mare." Hazel nodded. "She came back." "She's a miracle, that's what she is," Martha whispered. In the paddock, under a lean-to reinforced with extra beams, Luna stood dry and still, head tucked low. Jasper had curled beside the gate, eyes half-lidded, his body still on alert. Later that night, Elliot returned, soaked and stunned by the news. He knelt beside his mother, examining her ankle before ruffling Hazel's damp hair. "You all right?" he asked. Hazel looked out the window at Luna, the mare's silhouette outlined against the lantern glow. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think we all are." A week after the storm, the ranch took on a new rhythm. The sky over Bozeman had returned to its clear, cold blue, and snow now dusted the distant ridgelines like powdered sugar. The days were short, the light gold and soft, but something warmer had begun to stir on the Quinn ranch, an energy that hadn't existed since before Peter Quinn died. Luna's return during the storm had changed more than the weather. It had cracked something open in all of them. Each morning now, Hazel woke to the smell of peppermint tea already steeping in the kitchen. Her grandmother, once content to eat alone and in silence, had taken to rising before dawn, lighting the stove, and placing a second mug on the table. When Hazel came downstairs, she'd find the table set, the morning paper unfolded, and Martha already watching the horizon through the frost-laced window. One morning, as Hazel reached for her boots, Martha nodded toward the coat rack. "Take the red brush today," she said without looking up. "It's softer, better for her new coat." Hazel blinked, surprised. "How did you?" "I was brushing horses when your daddy was still afraid of ponies," Martha said dryly. "You're using too much pressure on her sides, she flinches." Hazel grinned and took the red brush. Luna was changing, slowly but surely. Her coat had regained a glossy luster, silvery bronze under the morning sun. Her ribs had softened, and her gait was stronger, no longer the uncertain shuffle of a wounded animal. Jasper still followed Hazel faithfully each day, but now he wasn't alone. Luna had begun to follow Hazel too, just a few paces behind, never too close, but always near enough that Hazel could hear her soft breathing. Hazel began writing in an old composition notebook, short thoughts at first, then sketches. She drew Luna's face over and over, the shape of her eye, the arc of her neck. But more than that, she began sketching ideas, small paddocks, converted barns, signs that read, "Safe Haven." Something inside her was growing, just like Luna. A dream, a place where forgotten horses could find shelter and maybe find themselves again. One afternoon, while Hazel was sweeping the barn, her father emerged from the house carrying a rusted toolbox. Elliot rarely touched the barn anymore. Since Emily's death, it had become a place of ghosts for him. Her old tack still hung in the corner, her riding gloves still in a drawer, brittle and untouched. But now, he walked slowly into the space, looking at everything as if trying to remember how it used to be. "You planning to turn this place into a zoo?" he asked without judgment. Hazel looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Not a zoo," she said, "a rescue." Elliot nodded once, then knelt beside the rotted beam by the paddock gate. "This corner post's loose. We'll need new braces." Hazel watched him carefully, unsure whether to say anything. "You remember how your mom used to talk about opening a therapy stable?" Elliot asked, not looking up. Hazel's throat caught. "I didn't think she ever told anyone but me." "She told me," Elliot said, voice thick. "Plenty of times. I just didn't know how to help her back then." They worked together for the rest of the afternoon, fixing fence lines, scrubbing mold from the troughs, removing warped boards from the tack room. And while they worked, Elliot began to talk more. About Emily, about her laugh, about the time she tried to tame a wild colt and ended up with a broken finger and a permanent scar on her knuckle. "She named that colt Galileo," he said, chuckling. "Said he had stars in his hooves." Hazel smiled. "She had that way of seeing things." "She gave that to you," Elliot said quietly. "You see things too." That evening, they ate stew together at the table. The first time in months, all three of them had shared a meal without silence. Martha told Hazel how to braid a lead rope from old baling twine. Elliot recounted stories from his rodeo days. Even Jasper had a place under the table, snoring softly against the wood. Just before bed, Hazel went out to the paddock one last time. The moon was rising, casting silver shadows across the field. Luna stood near the fence, tail flicking gently, ears forward. Hazel stepped close, holding out her hand. Luna pressed her nose to Hazel's palm, then took a step forward and laid her head gently against Hazel's chest. Hazel didn't move, didn't speak, just stood in the silence, heart full, eyes stinging. From the porch, Martha watched. She didn't say a word, just pulled her shawl tighter around her and smiled. It began with a photograph. Nora Temple, the rescue worker who had visited weeks ago, returned unannounced one crisp morning. She wore a thick navy parka over jeans tucked into worn brown boots. Her hair, tied in a red scarf, glinted under the low Montana sun. She wasn't alone this time. Trailing behind her was a young man carrying a camera bag and tripod, moving with the relaxed energy of someone used to being behind the lens, not in front of it. "This is Caleb Rhodes," Nora introduced as they reached the porch. "Photographer, works freelance with the Bozeman Gazette." Caleb was in his late 20s, with curly dark hair and laugh lines etched into the corners of his amber eyes. He wore a plaid flannel shirt under a waxed canvas vest and nodded politely to Hazel, who had come out with hay still clinging to her sweater. "We heard about the storm," Nora said. About Luna. About what she did for your grandmother, and well, some stories deserve to be told. Hazel felt her cheeks flush. She looked to Martha, who had stepped out behind her. The older woman narrowed her eyes at the camera equipment. "I don't do interviews," Martha said flatly. "We're not here for you," Caleb said gently. "We're here for the horse, and the girl who believed in her." That afternoon, Caleb followed Hazel as she fed Luna, brushed her down, and led her slowly around the paddock. He stayed quiet, snapping photos from a distance, never using flash, always mindful of the mare's sensitivity. At one point, Luna walked directly toward him, paused, then dipped her head before trotting back to Hazel. Caleb's eyebrows rose. "She's got poise," he murmured. "She's got a past," Hazel replied. By the end of the week, the article appeared on the front page of the Sunday edition. The headline read, "From Forgotten to Fearless, the Mustang who found her way home." The piece detailed Luna's transformation, the storm, the rescue, and the family behind it all. Caleb's photographs captured Luna with moonlight in her mane and Hazel with her hand resting gently on the mare's withers. A quiet strength radiated from both. The town of Bozeman took notice. By the next Monday, the Quinn mailbox overflowed with letters. Some were handwritten notes of encouragement. Others were offers, hay donations, blankets, brushes, even handmade treats from the local 4-H club. Children dropped off apples and carrots in baskets on the porch steps. A woman named Shirley Morgan, short and stout, with an oversized parka and a booming laugh, arrived with her twin grandchildren, Sam and Ellie, who had drawn a picture of Luna with glitter markers and scrawled "Hero Horse" in bubble letters across the top. "I hope it's all right," Shirley said. "They've been talking about the moon horse non-stop." Hazel laughed, holding the drawing carefully. "She's more of a morning horse, but I think she'd be honored." Sam, a lanky 7-year-old with big glasses and a shy smile, whispered, "Is it true she saved your grandma?" Hazel knelt. "It's true. She came back when we thought she was gone for good." From that day on, kids in town began calling Hazel the Moon Horse Girl. Even Martha couldn't pretend she wasn't moved. She watched the visitors come and go from her place on the porch swing, wrapped in her quilt, cane propped beside her. She never asked for help down the stairs, but she always had a plate of oatmeal cookies nearby, just in case someone stops by. Her eyes, once so distant, now followed Luna across the field with something like awe. But it wasn't just children and curious neighbors who showed up. One Wednesday afternoon, Hazel came home from school to find a note taped to the door. "Stopped by. Back tomorrow. Important." It was signed with a looping script, Dr. Riley Morgan, DVM. The next day, Hazel waited. Around 3 in the afternoon, a burgundy pickup truck rumbled down the drive. A woman stepped out, tall, lean, and striking. She wore her dark hair in a tight braid down her back, and her coat bore the stitched name, Dr. R. Morgan. Her boots were polished, and her expression, though kind, was all business. "Dr. Morgan," she said, shaking Hazel's hand firmly. "Heard a lot about your Mustang." Dr. Riley Morgan was in her early 40s, a respected veterinarian who had grown up in Bozeman but spent the last decade working with abused and neglected horses across the Pacific Northwest. She had a reputation for taking on the hopeless cases, the ones no one else wanted. Luna stood alert as the vet approached, but she didn't bolt. Riley moved slowly, murmuring gently as she extended a hand. Luna sniffed it, then allowed the vet to stroke her neck. "She trusts easily, for one who's seen hard times," Riley said thoughtfully. "I'd like to offer my support, medical, behavioral, no charge." Hazel blinked. "Why?" Riley looked at her, eyes serious. "Because this story matters, and because I've seen what happens when horses like this are ignored." That night, Hazel sat at the table sketching in her notebook while Martha and Elliot played cards in the living room. Jasper dozed at her feet. She had drawn the outline of a barn with multiple stalls, a welcome sign, and fields stretching beyond the horizon. Above the drawing, in neat capital letters, she wrote, "Safe Haven." The story wasn't just spreading, it was building something real. The oak tree behind the Quinn farmhouse had stood for nearly a century. Wide-limbed and resolute, its branches formed a canopy that stretched over the rear yard like a guardian's hand. In its prime, the tree had shaded summer cookouts, wedding receptions, and birthday parties with checkered tablecloths and laughter that carried into the Golden Hills. But for years now, the yard had been quiet. No music, no chairs, no voices. only wind. That changed the week Hazel found a note taped to the refrigerator, written in her grandmother's sharp, looping cursive. "We're having a gathering. Sunday at 2. Nothing fancy, bring pie." Hazel reread it 3 times before rushing out to the barn, where Elliot was patching a rain barrel. "She's hosting something," Hazel said breathlessly. "Grandma, a real gathering." Elliot looked up, eyes squinting in the sun. "Under the oak?" he asked, his voice nearly unreadable. Hazel nodded. He smiled softly. "It's about time." They spent the next 3 days preparing. Hazel swept the porch until it gleamed, laid quilts across hay bales for makeshift benches, and helped Martha string old mason jar lanterns from the oak's lowest limbs. Elliot oiled the hinges on the screen door and pulled folding chairs from the attic. Even Jasper seemed to sense something special was coming. He stayed close to the porch and barked excitedly each time a vehicle pulled up the drive. On Sunday, the Quinn Ranch transformed. Cars arrived, one by one. First came Shirley Morgan with her twin grandkids and a jug of homemade apple cider. She wore a floral apron over a thick brown sweater, her cheeks flushed and hair tucked into a knit cap. She commandeered the makeshift buffet with cheerful authority, directing the setup of pies and casseroles like a general preparing for battle. Then came Nora Temple, wearing a scarf with horse silhouettes and a camera strung around her neck. Beside her was Caleb Rhodes, the photographer, who had brought a guest, his younger sister Sarah Rhodes, visiting from Missoula. Sarah was tall and slender, with wavy blonde hair tied into a long braid. She wore a forest green wool coat and cowboy boots with delicate stitching. A school counselor by profession, Sarah had a warm, steady energy, the kind that made even shy children talk within minutes. She immediately bonded with Ellie Morgan, showing her how to braid twine into friendship bracelets. Even Dr. Riley Morgan arrived, though she rarely attended social events, with her field vest still on and a dog crate in her truck containing a tiny rescue filly with a leg split. The foal, named Maple, was just 3 months old, chestnut, with a white blaze down her nose, and Riley hoped to leave her in Hazel's care for observation. "She needs gentleness," Riley explained, "the kind that lives here." Hazel couldn't believe it. A second horse, a second chance. By mid-afternoon, the yard was full of voices, children playing tag beneath the oak and the rich smells of potluck dishes wafting across the field. Luna stayed in the nearby paddock but watched everything attentively, her ears flicking as laughter floated her way. Several kids took turns feeding her bits of carrot through the fence. She accepted them calmly, no longer flinching, no longer the mare who once wept in shadows. As the sun dipped lower and the lanterns began to glow, Martha Quinn called everyone to attention with a single sharp clap of her hands. The crowd quieted, gathering in a loose half-circle beneath the oak. Martha stood with a cane in one hand, her silver hair braided down her back. She wore a navy cardigan over a faded denim skirt, and her voice, though raspy with age, rang clear. "I don't like speeches," she began, "but I reckon there's something to be said when you look around and see proof that broken things don't always stay broken." She gestured toward Hazel, then to Luna behind her. "That mare wasn't supposed to survive, but someone saw what no one else wanted to. Someone young, someone stubborn." Her voice trembled slightly, and I remembered something. That the world doesn't change because we say it should. It changes because someone dares to believe it still can. The crowd was still. Hazel blinked hard, trying to keep her tears from spilling. Then Elliot stepped forward. He looked out over the crowd, then down at his daughter. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. "I wasn't sure," he said. "Not about Luna. Not about any of it. After my wife passed, I didn't believe much in anything." He swallowed. "But Hazel, she didn't ask me to believe. She just showed me how. She loved something back to life, something no one else wanted, including parts of me." His voice cracked, but he continued. "She gave this family back its heart." Hazel's vision blurred. She reached for her dad's hand. Applause erupted, gentle at first, then swelling. Some folks cheered. Others wiped their eyes. The rest of the night passed in warmth and laughter. Children danced under the oak while guitars strummed soft chords. Sarah Rhodes taught Sam and Ellie how to waltz in the grass. Nora took photos of Luna standing with Hazel, the lanterns glowing behind them. Caleb recorded small interviews with guests about second chances and what hope looked like to them. Before the last dish was packed up and the final goodbye was said, Martha settled onto the porch swing, quilt across her knees, eyes wet but smiling. Hazel sat beside her. "You pulled this together," Martha whispered. Hazel shook her head. "Luna did." "No," Martha corrected. "You believed she could. That's what did it." The seasons rolled forward like slow thunder across the hills of Bozeman. Spring softened the earth, summer painted it in gold, and fall whispered through the cottonwoods in a hush of orange and crimson. Time, as it always does, carried with it change, but not all change was loss. Luna stood strong now, her coat thick and luminous, eyes no longer haunted but clear and sure. She had become more than a survivor. She was the lead mare of a small but growing herd, each one a rescue, each one a story. The paddocks behind the Quinn farmhouse had expanded. New fencing lined the far edges of the property, enclosing pastures where once only silence had lived. Hazel named it Moonfire Sanctuary, after Luna, her moon horse, and the quiet fire that had burned through them both since the day they first met. The name was painted in soft script on the white wooden sign at the edge of the drive. Beneath it, the words "Where the broken find strength and the lost find home." Maple, the little chestnut foal brought by Dr. Riley, was the first edition. She grew fast under Hazel's care, her splint removed after 2 months. Though still timid, she followed Luna everywhere, mimicking her step for step. Then came Bruno, a retired ranch gelding with a deep scar across his flank, surrendered by a local family unable to care for him. He was big and slow-moving, with a habit of falling asleep while being brushed. After him came Olive, a spotted Appaloosa with a sharp eye and a sharp temper, rescued from an overrun breeding pen. Luna handled them all, her presence calming, her movements graceful but firm. Hazel's routine had shifted permanently. She graduated early from high school, choosing to stay on the ranch full-time. Most mornings began before dawn with Jasper, older now, slower, but still loyal, trotting beside her as she made her rounds. Sarah Rhodes visited often from Missoula, helping part-time during school breaks, and occasionally bringing at-risk teens for equine therapy sessions. Sarah's gentle, empathetic manner paired perfectly with the horses. She had a quiet bond with Olive in particular. The two shared a sort of mutual mistrust in strangers, and their connection was built over long, wordless afternoons. Dr. Riley stopped by monthly to check on the herd. She and Hazel had developed a natural working rhythm, and Riley often brought veterinary students to observe the sanctuary's unique healing process. Caleb continued photographing the growth of Moonfire, submitting stories and spreads to equine magazines across the state. The sanctuary had a small online following now, enough to support modest donations and occasional volunteers from nearby towns. Through it all, Martha remained the heart at the center. She never said much about the name of the sanctuary, but Hazel caught her once, standing by the gate, running her fingers over the painted wood with a softness that needed no explanation. That winter, the cold came early. Frost claimed the pastures by late October, and snow swept across the valley with gentle persistence. Martha, now 81, moved less and slept more. She spent her afternoons on the porch, wrapped in quilts, watching Luna guide Maple around the field, or listening to Hazel read old ranch journals aloud. Her eyes still sparkled, though her voice grew weaker with each passing week. One morning in late February, Hazel entered her grandmother's room with a steaming mug of tea. Martha was still, her chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. On the windowsill sat the small wooden horse figurine Peter had carved decades ago. Hazel sat beside her and took her hand. She didn't wake. By dusk, the snow had stopped. The wind softened. Hazel stood beside Martha's bed for a long time before walking out to the field. Luna approached her, sensing the weight of the day. Hazel didn't speak. Luna didn't move. They stood together in the quiet until the stars blinked overhead. Spring came again, as it always did, and with it, new life. Hazel expanded the sanctuary slowly, never more than they could handle. She planted wildflowers near the paddock gates, rebuilt the barn roof, and installed a wooden bench beneath the oak tree where her grandmother had once spoken to the crowd. One evening, nearly a year later, Hazel stood by the old fence that bordered the pasture. The boards were worn smooth from decades of hands and weather. She rested her palms against them, eyes drifting toward the horizon. Behind her, she heard the soft crunch of hooves. Luna stepped close, stopping beside her. Hazel didn't turn. She felt the gentle nudge of a familiar nose press against her shoulder. Quiet, steady, like it had been all those years ago. She smiled. "It all started with a glance," Hazel whispered, "and a heart that refused to give up." The sun dipped behind the hills, casting the ranch in amber light. The horses grazed peacefully, the wind rustled through the cottonwoods, and Jasper, now mostly deaf, rested beneath the porch steps. At Moonfire Sanctuary, every scar had a story, and every story had found its place. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't arrive with lightning or fanfare. They come quietly, in the form of a broken horse, a stubborn girl, or a heart that refuses to give up. This story reminds us that when we choose to believe in what the world has given up on, we become part of something sacred. Whether it's a wounded animal, a grieving loved one, or even our own tired spirit, healing begins with a small act of faith. In Luna's journey and Hazel's quiet courage, we see a reflection of how God works in everyday life, not through spectacle, but through compassion, patience, and unwavering love. If we open our hearts, we might just find that God has already placed a miracle right beside us. All we need to do is see it and choose to love it back to life. If this story touched something in you, please take a moment to share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope is never lost. Leave a comment below and say amen if you believe that God still sends miracles to those who dare to love. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, and may God bless you and your family with strength, healing, and quiet wonders, just like Luna.